She came to heel. He was the reason she finally did. The pump handle never did sit right in my hand after the river took 2 of my fingers, so I worked it with the heel and the 3 I had left, and that's what I was doing when the dust came. You'd know it if you'd seen it. Not weather. A wall. Brown going on yellow going on the color of an old bruise, standing up off the flat ground higher than a church and walking toward you slow, the way a thing walks when it is all day and you don't. The light goes first, then the sound. Then it's on you and there's grit in your teeth and your eyes and the part in your hair, and you've shut the stock in and shut yourself in and you wait. I had the trough half full. I left it. The well's the only reason there was ever anything out there at all. A man named Dolph dug it 40 foot down through Caliche back before the war and put up a shack and called it a stop. And then Dolph died of a horse, and I bought the paper off the bank for less than the rope cost, and there I stayed. Crossing, they called it on the maps, though there wasn't a thing to cross but a dry wash that ran twice a year. People came off the trail for the water and the eggs and a wall to put their back to, and most of them never learned my name and I never asked theirs, and that suited the both of us. I'm telling it wrong already. I do that. I'll come back around. The dust that day was the front edge of it. The company came in behind, out of the brown, the way ships come out of fog in the pictures. First you hear the chain and the bawling oxen, then you see the lead team's heads, then the whole stumbling string of them, 11 wagons and a riding party and a herd of footsore stock, all of them blind and choking and aimed at my well like it was the gate of heaven. Folks always come at the water like that. I've never minded. Water's the one thing I had that nobody could look down on me for having. So they came on in and I worked the pump. You spend years at a stop like that, you learn the shape of how people come and go past a man, and the shape of it for me was always about the same. They'd water, they'd buy what eggs I had and sometimes a meal, they'd put their backs to my wall and sleep, and in the morning they'd go, and somewhere in the middle of it they'd find out about the hand and the rest of me would go quiet to them. I got so I could tell the minute it happened. A man would be talking to me like I was a man, about the trail ahead, about the grass, about the price of mules in haze, and then he'd see the hand and there'd be that little hitch, and from there on out he'd talk to me the way you talk over the head of somebody who's not quite there. Slower, kinder, like I needed the kindness. I didn't need the kindness. I needed to be talked to like a man, which is a different and rarer thing. I'd given up on getting it, mostly. That's the honest center of where I was when the dust came. I wasn't unhappy, understand. A man can make a peace with being passed over, and I had the well and the stock and the Sky and Annie's stone out back to tell the day to, and that was a life. That was a real life, and I won't have anybody calling it a sad one. But I'd put a thing down years before, the wanting to be seen, and I'd put it down so long I'd forgot I was the one carrying it. You can do that with a heavy thing. Carry it so long you mistake it for your own weight. Now here's a thing about my hand, since I'll be coming back to it. The river that took it was the Platte in a bad spring, and it wasn't the water did it, it was the chain. We had a span of mules going across with a loaded freighter, and the team lost their feet in the current and the wagon turned, and the trace chain whipped up and I put my hand in to free a mule that was drowning in the rig, and the chain took my 2 outside fingers off clean and most of the use out of the rest. I kept the mule, lost the freight, lost the fingers, near lost the arm to the rot before a sawbones in Kearney burned it clean. That was the end of my freighting. A teamster wants 2 hands, and there's no one at all for a 1.5 hand man, so I bought a hole in the ground with water at the bottom of it, and I learned to do everything slow and a little crooked, and I got so I could do most things. What I never got was so people would look at the hand without their face doing a thing. You'd think a man stops noticing. You don't. 40 years and I could still feel it land on me, the little catch in a person when they reached to take a dipper from me and saw what was holding it out. Children stared, which is honest, and I never minded children. Grown folks looked and then looked away too quick and then talked to me a half-degree too kind, the way you'd talk to a dog you weren't sure of. I knew that voice. I'd have known it in my sleep. I'm telling you this so you'll understand what it was when she didn't do it, but I'm ahead of myself again. The company was bound west and a little north for a valley town that wanted settling, and they'd got themselves a fair distance out before they ran into trouble. The trouble, by the time it limped into my crossing, was 2 things stacked on each other. The dust was the first and the small one. The second was that they had sickness in the train. I smelled it before anyone said it. You keep a stop long enough, you learn the smell of a wagon that's got a sick person laid up in it. There's a sweet sour to it, the smell of a body burning itself down with fever, and a smell of fear on the people around it that's just as strong. Their boss man, Brunner, big through the chest, a watch chain across him like he was somebody, climbed down stiff and started in telling me how it was. How they'd water up and push on by morning, how they were behind their season and couldn't lose a day. And the whole time he was talking, I was watching the third wagon back, where a woman was climbing down out of the canvas with her sleeves shoved up past the elbow and her hands wet. She didn't go to the well first, the way everybody goes to the well first. She went to the fire. She had a kettle going before her feet were good on the ground, and she was calling for clean rag and boiled water, and her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, and people did what she said. I watched her a minute. I knew what she was. You don't have to be told. I went and filled her kettle myself, since I had the pump going and she didn't, and I carried it over and set it on her hook, and she said thank you without looking up, and then she did look up because of the weight of it, I expect. A full kettle's heavy, and she'd have felt me favoring the one arm. She looked up and she looked at the hand on the bale. And nothing happened in her face. I want to be plain about how small that is and how it wasn't small at all. She saw it. She wasn't blind and she wasn't pretending. She saw the two gone fingers and the way the others curled, and she saw all of it the way she'd see a wound on anybody, and then she just took the kettle off me with both her hands wrapped right over mine to get the grip, warm hands, and she said, "That's a good pour. Most folks slosh it," and she turned back to her fire. I stood there like a post. I'd carried 1,000 kettles. Nobody'd ever said a word about the pour. Her name was Cora. I didn't learn it that day. I learned it 3 days on, when the sickness had its teeth all the way in, and there wasn't any more pretending the company'd be gone by morning. They couldn't move. That was the long and short. The fever they had was the kind that runs through close-living people like fire through grass. It came on with a chill and a headache, and then went to the lungs and the gut, and a strong young body could fight it 3 days and stand up weak, and an old body or a small one couldn't always. By the 3rd day they had 9 down, and 2 of those were children, and Brunner with his watch chain was standing at my well telling me they were leaving in the morning, sick or no sick, because to stay was to let it run through the whole train. "Some of these can't be moved," Cora said. She'd come up behind him. She had blood on her apron that wasn't hers, and her hair was coming down, and she looked like she'd been awake since the world was made. "You put the Prout girl in a jolting wagon over that ground, you'll bury her by noon." "Then I'll bury her by noon," Brunner said, "and the other 40 go on living." I'd been quiet. I'm mostly quiet. It's the regular state of a man who lives alone. You forget there was ever a reason to talk. But I set down the dipper and I said, "Nobody's moving sick folks off my water." He turned and gave me the up and down, saw the hand. I watched him decide I was nothing, and I watched him be wrong about it, which is a thing I've had a lot of practice at. "This your road, is it?" he said. "It's my well," I said. "It's my shack and my graves and my 40 foot of water, and the trail's the government's, but the water's mine, and a man with sick people doesn't push them out into a dust country away from the one well for a day's ride because it's tidy. You can go on in the morning. You, the well ones, you can take what you can carry. The sick stay till they can stand, and she stays with them, and I'll feed them out of what I've got, and that's the end of where you tell me my business." Brunner looked at Cora. Cora looked at me. There was a thing in her face I couldn't read then, and I can read now. Looking back, it was surprise, but not the kind that says I didn't think you had it in you. It was the kind that says I'd stopped looking for that, and there it is. "You can't feed 9 sick and yourself off a stop," Brunner said, but the wind was out of him. "Then I'll feed them off less," I said. "Go count your wagons." He went. He was a hard man, but he wasn't a wicked one, and a hard man'll mostly do the easy right thing. Once you've made the wrong thing cost him a fight. In the morning he took the train on, the well ones, and he left me 4 wagons and 9 sick and a healer, and he left a little flour and a side of bacon and a sack of beans, which was more than I'd figured he would, and he didn't look back, which I didn't blame him for. The dust of them hung in the air an hour after the sound of them was gone. Then it was quiet, and it was her and me and the dying. I gave her the shack. There wasn't an argument about it. I had a lean-to off the stock shed where I kept harness and slept summers when the shack got too close, and I moved my roll out there and gave her the 4 walls and the 1 window and the stove, and we laid the worst of the sick on the floor of it on what bedding the wagons had, and the rest we kept in the wagons with the canvas thrown back for the air. I'll tell you what those days were because you should know them to understand the rest. They weren't soft. There's nothing soft about fever in a dry country. The work was water, mostly, water boiled and water cooled and water carried, gallon on gallon, because a fever burns the wet right out of a body, and you have to put it back a spoon at a time down throats that don't want it. I worked the pump till my good hand cramped and my bad arm hung dead, and I cut wood and kept the kettle going, and I dug the necessary holes downwind, and I held people while she did the things to them that had to be done. I'm a big enough man yet, was bigger then, and a body in a fever fights you without meaning to, thrashes and bucks, and somebody's got to hold the shoulders steady while the healer works, and that was me. I held a lot of shoulders that week. And I dug. The first was an old man, Deck, who'd been failing before the fever ever found him and who went the second night. Quiet, the way the old ones mostly go, just stopped between one breath and the next while I was wetting his lips. I dug him in by lantern out back, near my wife. I'll get to my wife. And I cut his name in a board with my knife because Cora asked me to. And I did it slow and crooked with the bad hand, and it took half the night, and she sat with me while I did it and didn't talk and didn't watch the hand, just watched the letters come. That was when she told me her name. She'd been Cora to the company, but to me she'd been the healer and I'd been the keeper, and somewhere in the lantern light over Deck's board she said, "I'm Cora, by the way, Cora Lyle." And I said my name back, which I won't make a thing of, my name's a plain one, and she said it once like she was setting it somewhere she'd find it again. The second was a child. I'll come to that, I have to come to it slow. There was a woman in the train named Della Mott, and I'll tell you a little of her because she's how I know what I was to those people in the end, more than I'd have known on my own. She had two down, her own boy, and a half-grown girl that wasn't hers but had been put in her wagon when the girl's mother took the fever first and couldn't tend her. So Della had two sick that weren't supposed to be her whole burden, and they'd become it. And she was no healer. She was just a stubborn woman doing what was in front of her. And she and I crossed paths 100 times a day at the pump and the fire. First days she wouldn't quite look at me, same hitch as anybody. By the fourth day she'd stopped, because by the fourth day she'd watched me carry water till my arm hung and dig in the dark and hold her boy's shoulders while Cora worked him. And a person's manners about a hand don't survive watching that hand do right by their child for 4 days running. She got to where she'd hand me the boy's cup to fill without thinking about which hand took it. That's a small thing, and it was an enormous thing. By the end, she'd hunt me out to talk, not over my head to me about her boy, about her dead husband back in Ohio, about whether the girl that wasn't hers would have anybody left to go to. She talked to me like a man because she'd run plumb out of room to do otherwise, and once a person runs out of that room, they mostly never go back into it. I've noticed that. Fear of a thing dies the second you're too tired to keep it up. The work those days didn't let up to allow any of it mind. I'm making it sound like there was time to stand and talk, and there wasn't hardly. It was water and wood and waste around the clock. A fever camp has a smell and a sound to it that gets into you and doesn't wash out for weeks, the smell I've told you. And the sound is low. It's people breathing wrong and people praying low, and the particular small misery noise a sick child makes that isn't crying because crying takes more than they've got. I heard that sound out of the Mott boy for 3 days, and then on the fourth it stopped, and I came in braced for the worst of all worsts, and he was sitting up. Weak as water and gray as ash and asking for something to eat. They do that, the ones that turn the corner. They ask for food like nothing happened. I went and fried him an egg with the bad hand, and Della Mott watched me do it and put her face in her apron, and that was the first one we kept, and I have never in my life been gladder to fry an egg. The second was a child. I'll come to that, I have to come to it slow. Here's my wife, since I said I'd get to her. She was Annie, and we had 8 years and no children that lived, and she died of a fever not so different from this one, in a town we'd stopped in for the winter when I was still freighting, 2 years before the chain took my fingers. There wasn't any healer in that town. There was a drunk that called himself a doctor, and there was me, and between us we did everything wrong out of not knowing, and I held her shoulders down the same way I'd come to hold the company's sick, and there wasn't any water clean enough or any hand wise enough, and she went anyway. I buried her in that town, and I went back to the road, and when the chain took my hand a man might have called it bad luck, but I never quite did. A man who's already lost the main thing doesn't have far to fall over the rest. I brought her stone with me, is the part I mean to tell. When I bought the crossing, I went back the long way, and I dug her up and I brought her on in a box on the freighter 300 mile, and I put her in the ground out back of the shack, and I cut her a stone proper, granite I hauled, and I sat with her of an evening for 40 years and told her the small news there was to tell. It's not a sad thing the way you'd think. It was company. A man alone makes the company he can. So when the company's dead started going in the ground out back, they went in next to Annie, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't turn something over in me, to be cutting boards by lantern again and holding shoulders again and losing again. I'd built a whole life out of not doing those things anymore. And here they were, walked in out of the dust, every one of them. And here was a woman who did this for her living, who walked toward the fire instead of the well, who could do the things to a body that had to be done and not look away. I watched her work and I thought, there's a person who's never lost anybody to be able to stand this much of it. That's what I thought. I was so wrong about it, I'm near ashamed to say I thought it. She didn't sleep. That was the first thing I caught. I'd come in at the gray of morning to take a turn at the wedding, and she'd be exactly where I'd left her at midnight, on the stool between the two worst, a wet cloth going from one brow to the other and back, and her eyes would be open and her hands would be moving and she'd answer me sensible, but she hadn't slept. She'd just gone on. The second night the same. The third, I'd say, lie down an hour, I'll watch them, and she'd say, I'll rest when they break. And they didn't break, two of them, they hung right on the edge, and so she didn't rest, and I started to see how it was going to go. She was going to go down standing. She was going to put herself in the ground with the fever ones, not from the fever, from the not stopping. I knew that kind of not stopping. I'd done a version of it myself, the years after Annie, the years of just going on down the road because to stop was to feel it. I knew it from the inside. So I knew you couldn't talk a person out of it. You can't argue a person into resting who's resting from something worse than tired. So I didn't argue, I fed her. I put a plate in front of her, and she'd let it go cold, and I'd take it away and bring it back warm and put it in front of her again. And the third time she'd eat, not to please me. Just because a body that's worked that long will eat if food's right under it and nobody's watching it too close. I learned to set it down and walk off so she wouldn't feel watched. I learned the hours she'd take a cup of coffee if it was already poured and the hours she wouldn't. I kept her stove hot and her kettle full and her bucket fresh without her asking, so the thing she reached for was always already there. It's not much, that kind of tending. It's the kind a man does for stock. But it was what I had and I gave it the way I knew how, which is steady, and I think I know now that the steady was the thing. She'd been the one everybody leaned on her whole life, and here was a man just quietly making sure the floor was under her feet, and she didn't have words for it yet, but her body knew it. She started looking for me. I'd come in and her eyes would go to the door first thing, find me, and go back to her work easier. I want to be careful here. I'm an old man telling a young thing, and there's a danger in it, of making it more than it was. It wasn't courting. There wasn't time nor room nor a thought of it. It was two people keeping 9 others alive in a shack on a dry plain, and somewhere in the keeping a thing started underneath that neither of us was looking at. That's the truest way I can say it. Brunner had been gone 6 days when the Prout girl turned bad. She was called Mercy, which is a hard name to write on a board, and I'll tell you now so you can brace the way I couldn't. I wrote it. But not yet. She was 8 or 9, a tough little thing. She'd come in sick, but bright-eyed, and Cora'd had hopes of her. And on the 6th night the fever climbed up into her lungs the way it does, and she started to drown in herself sitting up. And Cora went to war for that child like I have never seen one human being go to war for another. I held the girl's shoulders. I held them all night. Cora steamed her and beat her little back to break the lungs loose and tipped her head down and breathed for her, mouth to mouth, again and again, and got her back twice. And the third time she didn't get her back, and the gray was coming up in the window, and there was a point I felt the child go still under my hands, and I knew it, and Cora knew it, and Cora wouldn't have it. She breathed and she breathed, and she pressed that little chest, and she said the child's name like she was calling her in from a far field. And I had to, God forgive me, it was the hardest thing. I had to take the healer by the shoulders the way I'd been taking the sick and turn her and hold her off the child and say, Cora, Cora, she's gone. She's gone, you can stop. She's gone. And the iron came off her all at once, all of it. 6 days of not sleeping and a lifetime of not stopping came off her in my arms in one breath, and she went down, not in a faint, in a buckle, and I caught her and went down with her onto the dirt floor of my shack, and she made a sound I won't try to make for you. It wasn't for the Prout girl, some of it was. But it was older than the Prout girl. It came up from a long way down. I had it wrong, you see. I'd thought, there's a woman who's never lost anybody. What it was she'd lost everybody. She told it to me there on the floor, between the sounds, in pieces, the way a thing comes up when it's been held under a long time. She'd had a husband, a young doctor, and they'd had a girl. and a fever had come through their town back east, the same family of fever, like as not, that we were sitting in the middle of, and her husband had worked it day and night and caught it off the work and died of it. And then their girl had caught it, and Cora had nursed her exactly the way she just nursed the brute child, every trick and every breath, and had lost her too in 3 days in her own arms. And Cora had not gone down then. There hadn't been anybody to catch her, and there'd been a town still full of sick, so she'd wiped her face and gone back out and kept working, and she'd never stopped working, town to town, fever to fever, west and west, healing other people's because she couldn't bear to be still in a room with her own. She'd never wept for them, not once in 6 years. She'd told me she'd rest when the sick broke, and she'd meant it, and she'd never meant to stop, because to stop was to be a woman sitting in an empty room with 2 graves 1,000 miles behind her. She got all the way to the bottom of it on my floor with the dawn coming and the dead child cooling and the 8 others breathing rough around us, and I held her, and I didn't say any of the things you're not supposed to say, none of the it's all rights or the she's in a better places. I'd had those said to me over Annie, and I'd wanted to hit the man that said them. I just held her with both arms, the good one and the half one, and I said the only true thing I had, which was, I've got her. I've got the rest of them. You can put it down a while, I've got it. And she put it down. For the first time in 6 years, somebody had the floor under her, and she put it down. And she slept, went out against my chest like the child she'd just lost, and slept 4 hours on the dirt while I sat with my back to the bed leg and didn't move and let my arm go dead and watched the others and let her sleep. That's the thing I'd do again. Out of a whole life, if I got to keep 1 hour of it, I'd keep that one. A man who'd been told his whole grown life that he was less by the chain and the looks and the brunners, sitting on a dirt floor being the strong enough thing for once. Being the rock and not the broke one. You don't know what that is till you've been the broke one a long time. The fever broke in the rest of them over the next while. 8 came up out of it weak and lived. We'd lost 3, Deck, and the Prout girl, and a young man named Sayer who'd gone the first night before I rightly knew his face. 3 boards out back by Annie's stone, cut slow and crooked, and I cut Mercy Prout's the slowest of all, and Cora sat with me while I did it, same as the first night. Only this time partway through she put her hand over my bad one, over the gone fingers, right on the scar of them, not to take the knife, just to put it there, and she left it there a while, and we didn't say anything. That's the picture I'd want you to have if you only got one. Her hand over the ruined one in the lantern light, on a child's board, the both of us done crying, and not done grieving, and not minding the company of it. After that there was a stretch I didn't expect, and didn't know what to do with, which was quiet. The fever had crested. The ones that were going to live had turned the corner, and the ones that weren't had gone, and what was left was 8 people getting their feet back under them slow, and not much for a healer to do but watch and feed and wait. And so for the first time since the dust came, there were hours in the day with nothing burning in them. I didn't know how to be around her in those hours. We'd had a purpose between us, and now the purpose was easing off, and I felt the want of it, felt how it had been a thing to stand behind. Without the sick to tend, I was just a maimed man at a well, and she was just a worn-out woman who'd be leaving when a train came. And I caught myself getting quiet and short the way I do when I'm bracing for a thing to be taken back. She caught it too. She didn't let it sit. That was her way, and I'd come to count on it. She'd walk straight at a thing the way she walked at the fire instead of the well. "You've gone somewhere," she said the second quiet evening. We were on the bench by the door watching the light go. "You were here a week, and now you're off behind your own eyes. Where'd you go?" I could have turned it. I'm good at turning a thing. But I was too tired to, or she'd worn the turning out of me, one or the other, so I told her the truth, which was, "I'm getting ready for you to go." She didn't say anything to that for a while. Then she said, "Show me the graves." It wasn't what I looked for her to say. But I took her out back in the last of the light and showed her the 3 new boards and the older ones, and then I showed her Annie's stone, and I told her about Annie, the 8 years, the town, the drunk doctor, the bringing her 300 mile in a box to lie out behind a well in a dry country. I'd never told a living soul that. There'd never been one to tell. Cora stood and listened to all of it with her arms folded against the evening cool, and she didn't say one of the things people say. She said when I was done, "You dug her up and carried her 300 miles so she wouldn't be alone in a town that let her die." She looked at me. "Most men would have left her and called it grief. You carried her." "Didn't seem like a choice," I said. "It's always a choice," she said. "That's the whole of what I've learned doctoring. Who gets carried and who gets left is always somebody's choice." And she looked at Annie's stone a while longer, and I had a thing happen in my chest I hadn't had happen in a long time, which was the sense of being weighed by somebody and not coming up short. We sat out there past dark. She told me more of her too. Her husband's name was Thomas, and her girl's name was Bate. And Bate had been 4. And Bate had liked to be carried even when she was too big for it. Would put her arms up and say up, up, and Cora had carried her till the fever made her too heavy to lift, and then had held her instead 3 days. And I listened to all of it the way she'd listened to Annie, without saying the things. And at some point her hand was on the bench between us, and at some point my bad one was over it, and we left them like that. And neither of us moved them, and the stars came out the way they do over a flat country, thick, all the way down to the ground on every side. She slept in the shack that night, and I slept in the linta like always. But something had been said out at the graves without being said, and we both knew it, and I stopped after that, getting ready for her to go. I didn't dare hope exactly. A man my make doesn't let himself all the way into hope, it's too far to fall back out of. But I quit bracing. There's a difference. I quit bracing and I just let the days be good, the few I figured I had, and they were good. She got her color back and her sleep back. And she'd come find me at whatever I was doing and hand me a tool before I reached for it, learning my work the way I'd learned her hours. And we got easy with each other in a way I'd been easy with nobody since Annie, and the 8 got strong, and then, of course, a train came. A train always comes. That's the trouble with a stop on a trail. The whole point of the place is that people pass through it. A train came through inside the month eastbound, and the 8 well ones took passage on it back to the settlements or on west to catch their people, whichever they chose, and there was a morning of it. The loading and the thank yous, some of them crying, a woman pressing a Bible on me that I've still got, the men shaking my good hand, and a couple of them. This is the part, a couple of them taking the bad one on purpose, gripping it like it was a hand, looking me in the eye. Word gets around a sick camp who kept it alive. They knew. For about 3 weeks of my life, in one little camp on a dry plain, I was a man people were glad to have known, and they let me know it, and a man can live a long time on 3 weeks like that. Then the train pulled out and the dust of it hung and settled, the way it had with Brunner, and it was quiet again. And Cora was standing in my door. She could have gone, that's what you have to understand for it to land. There was a seat for her on that train and a need for her wherever it stopped. A healer's wanted everywhere. She'd never have gone hungry a day. She could have climbed up and gone on healing strangers town to town the rest of her life, which is the life she'd built and the life she knew. Nobody'd have thought a thing about it. I didn't ask her to stay. I want that clear. I'd have cut my own remaining fingers off before I'd have asked her to stay out of pity or out of being needed, because I knew what it was to be stayed with out of pity. I'd watched people do me kindnesses my whole life with that half-degree of too much in their voice, and I'd rather have been left. So I didn't ask. I started in carrying her things to the train like I figured she was going, because that's what a man does. He doesn't make a woman say the hard thing. He makes it easy for her to go if going's what she's doing. And she said, "Put that down." I put it down. She came across the yard to me. She had her sleeves shoved up past the elbow like the first day, and her hair was doing what it would, and she stood close, closer than the work had ever put us. And she took my bad hand in both of hers, found the grip right over the gone fingers, warm hands, the way she'd taken the kettle that first hour, and she held it up between us where we could both look at it, and she said, "You think this is the part of you I'd be leaving behind?" I didn't say anything. I'm not sure I could have. "I came out here to heal people," she said. "I told myself that's what I was for, 6 years, and I never healed the one that needed it because I never once stood still long enough to let anybody get a hand on me." She turned my ruined hand over in hers, looked at it like a thing worth looking at. "You put the floor under me. You're the first person since my husband died that I didn't have to be strong in front of." She looked up. "I'm not leaving, unless you tell me to. And you're not going to tell me to because you've wanted me to stay for 2 weeks and you've been too decent to say it. You've just been keeping my kettle full." The eastbound train pulled out behind her while she was saying it. Neither of us turned to watch it go. She put my hand flat against her face then, the bad side of it, the scar and the gone fingers against her cheek, and she held it there, and she shut her eyes, and a man who'd spent 40 years watching faces flinch off that hand stood in his own dusty yard, and felt a woman lean her whole tired weight into it like it was the soundest thing she'd ever put her trust in. "I'm an old man. I've buried near everybody. I'll tell you that's the day my life turned over, and it turned because a strong woman who could have gone anywhere looked at the worst used part of me and chose to lay her face against it. She stayed. There's 40 years on the back end of that, and I won't make you sit through them. But I'll give you the shape, because you'll want to know it didn't go sour, and it didn't. She doctored. Word got out down the trail that there was a healer at the crossing, and they came, off the trains and out of the country roundabout, longer hauls every year as the settlements thickened. And the place that had been a hole in the ground with water at the bottom became a stop people aimed for on purpose, the way the company had aimed for the well, only now it was her they aimed for. She set bones and pulled babies and sewed up the cut and sat with the dying, and I kept her kettle full and her stove hot and her bucket fresh. And I dug the holes for the ones she couldn't save and cut their boards slow and crooked, and we put a good many of them out back, but a great many more got up and went on living, and she healed every one of them with her own 2 hands, and I never once felt a small man for it. There was a freighter came through one winter with his leg broke bad under a tipped load, broke so the bone was out through the skin and the cold had got to it. And another healer would have taken the leg, and a worse one would have let him die. And Cora worked on that leg 3 weeks straight through a blizzard that had us all penned in the shack together, the freighter and his teamster and the 2 of us. And she saved the leg and the man, and when the thaw came he walked out on it. Before he climbed up to go, he stood in my yard a long minute looking at the place, the well and the shack and the boards out back, and he said to me, low, man to man, "You know what you've got here?" And I said I believed I did. And he said, "No, I mean the both of you. Apart you're a well and a doctor. Together you're the only reason a man like me makes it across this country alive." And he shook my hand, the bad one, took it on purpose, the way the company men had, and he went. That's what we were the 40 years. A well and a doctor that together were the reason men made it across. That's the thing I can't make young folks understand. She was the one with the gift, and I was the one with the well, and there was no ranking us. A healer's no good in a country with no water. We both knew it. We were the 2 halves of the one thing. We never had children that lived, either, the same as me and Annie. That grief found us 2 twice, and Cora grieved them out loud and proper on my chest, the way she'd learned she could, and we put the 2 little ones out back by Annie and by Mercy Prout and the rest, and it was sorrowful, but it didn't break us, because by then we both knew the floor would hold. She's out there now. I put her in the ground myself 4 winters past next to Annie, and I cut her stone the slowest of any granite with the bad hand, the way she'd have wanted it, and it took me near a month, and I didn't hurry it. I sit with the both of them of an evening. I've got 2 to tell the small news to now. I started this telling you about the dust, the wall of it coming, and the pump handle that never sat right. It still doesn't. I'm too old to work it now without I rest between strokes, and there's a young couple keeps the crossing for me, good people, and they think I'm a sweet old man and they don't quite believe the stories, and that's all right. But on the evenings I can, I go out to the well myself, and I draw up the dipper with the bad hand, the 3 fingers, the way I've done it 60 years, and I drink, and I look out at the flat where the dust came up that day taller than a church. And I think about a woman who walked toward my fire instead of my water, who took a full kettle off me with both hands wrapped warm over the ruin of mine, and said most folks slosh it. She came out to heal people. She told everyone she met that was what she was for, and it was true, she healed them by the 100. But the one she finally healed, after 6 years of running from it, the one she sat still long enough to mend, she'd tell you herself, she told everybody who'd listen. That one she did standing in my dusty yard with my worst hand against her face. I was the well she came to in the end, and she was mine. The dipper's cool against my mouth. The light's going off the flat the way it does, gentle this evening, no wall to it. I draw up another and I drink and I go in.